think it makes sense to go ahead and get started. It looks like the majority of people are on, yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. So I wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Michaela Morris, and I'm an Oceans Fellow with Environment America. We are a national advocacy organization with affiliate groups in 29 different states across the country. I'm based in Boston, but we have people from California to DC, so all across the whole nation. And we work to protect clean air, clean water, and public lands. First, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for this underwater hike through Dr. Seuss's garden, the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts. We have a really fun program planned, and there's going to be fun parts for both kids and adults. With us tonight, we have Kelsey Lamp, Oceans Advocate with Environment America. Thank you, Kelsey. And also Dr. Peter Auster, Senior Research Scientist with Mystic Aquarium. On that note, I did also want to thank Mystic Aquarium for partnering with us to host this webinar. So on today's program, we'll watch a video about the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, which is an area off the coast of New England that's a special haven for all kinds of sea animals. Dr. Peter Auster, the scientist we introduced earlier, has actually explored the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, and so he'll show us some of the amazing animals and landscapes that he's seen. After, you're going to get to ask him questions, and then we'll all spend some time drawing our favorite animals that we've discovered. And I'll be leading a lesson on how to draw a sperm whale, which is one of my favorite animals. So you guys, we are going to start our underwater exploration today by taking a trip to the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts. We're going to begin our journey with this video. So it was produced by our colleagues at the National Resource Defense Council, and it does a great job explaining and exploring the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Monument. Oh, wrong part.
When we think of the ocean floor, most of us imagine miles of just flat plains. But the ocean floor off the east coast of the United States is stunningly dramatic. It's carved with canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, and beyond those, enormous extinct volcanoes. To protect this unique area, President Obama made almost 5,000 square miles of it a national monument, making it the first marine monument in the U.S. waters of the Atlantic Ocean. When you're on the surface of the water steaming out there, you know you've reached the monument area without even looking at a chart, because the waters are bubbling with animals. Scientists describe this monument as a generator of abundant marine life for the larger surrounding area. Very few people get to actually see our ocean depths for themselves. I had to gather my courage to go down to 1,500 feet in a submersible the first time I did it. But once I descended to the deep sea, it changed my relationship to this planet. You know, this is the first and only place in the Atlantic where marine mammals can swim at low risk of getting entangled in some kind of fishing gear. Obama closed it to industrial fishing. And you have these amazing deep divers of the ocean out there, like sperm whales, who can submerge for up to 2 hours at a time while they hunt for food. These canyons and seamounts lie on the edge of our continent, but they're also the beginning of the deep sea, which is the dominant ecosystem on Earth. Our planet has a long and ancient history. As you descend into the ocean, into this truly alien world, it feels like being in a time machine, seeing geological epochs go by. Scientists started doing ecological research in this area, and it became immediately apparent there were many animals here we didn't have names for. There are corals here that are 4,000 years old. Even though they're perfectly adapted for their high-pressure, harsh, lightless home, these animals are fragile. They have very long recovery times if they're disturbed. They live in one of the most pristine habitats in the Atlantic Ocean. Right now, it's protected from seabed mining, oil and gas drilling, and industrial fishing. But opening it back up would be incredibly destructive. The northwestern Atlantic is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet. As the ocean changes, we need to protect habitats like this to be sources of biodiversity. Being at this depth taught me that we are really interlopers into a world that isn't only ours. At first I thought Being at the bottom of the sea was like being on a different planet. But then I realized, wait a minute, no, this is Earth. The truth is, 70% of our planet is ocean. So we land dwellers are really the minority. And honestly, it feels wrong as visitors to demand to use every inch of this planet for our sole benefit. All we're asking is this, that we set aside these very precious and delicate areas so that they can exist on Earth along with us in perpetuity.
I hope you guys enjoyed that video as much as I did. I've seen it a couple times now, and I think I have probably two favorite parts. My first one is when they talk about sperm whales, because I think it's really, really cool that they can hold their breath for up to 2 hours while they search for food. And my second favorite part is when they just outline some of the reasons that we should work to protect this really special place. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Peter Auster about his experiences on expeditions down to this underwater canyons and underwater volcanoes. It'll just take a moment to load his presentation. Yes, are you able to unmute yourself, Peter?
All right, I'm unmuted.
Great.
But I don't see my, do you have my screen?
I think you click share screen from your side of it.
All right, that didn't.
There we go.
All right, you got the.
Looks good from my end. Thanks for sticking with us, everyone.
All right, yeah, sorry about that. I can fly a submarine, but I can't run my computer. So we're going to go on a virtual hike through Dr. Seuss's garden in the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. And just to provide a little setting for where we're going today, you can see the northeast part of the coast of the United States. There's Cape Cod. I guess you can see my cursor on this. So there's Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, and here I am in Connecticut over here. And this large feature here is George's Bank. And as we get to the edge of George's Bank, it drops off into the deep ocean. And you can see that there's these canyons, submarine canyons that are cut in to the edge of the continental shelf. And indeed, here's oceanographer Gilbert and Lydonia Canyon that are part of the Marine National Monument. And then there's a long series of underwater volcanoes that stretch out into the center of the Atlantic Ocean. There's Bear, Physalia, Retriever, and Middle Seamounts that are within our 200-mile limit. And you can see on these close-up maps on the side here that this is Lydonia Canyon here, and over on the left side is Middle Seamount, a large flat-top seamount. And these underwater features are below the surface of the ocean. And this very complex oceanography, this shows chlorophyll on the sea surface from a satellite, intersects with the edge of the continental shelf and within the national monument to create this very complex environment that animals live. And as Michaela said earlier, and the animation discussed, is President Obama back in September of 2016 designated this region, and these are the boundaries here, the 3 submarine canyons and the 4 seamounts. This outer boundary here is the edge of our 200-mile limit as a marine national monument, which excludes all commercial kinds of extractive activities. It's about 4,900 square miles, about the size of Connecticut, and slightly larger than Yellowstone National Park. It's a tiny part of our 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and about 0.1% of the entire United States EEZ, or Outer Continental Shelf. And so I've been lucky over the course of my career, which is now stretching 40 years, which explains the white hair, to be able to spend time out in the submarine canyons and on the seamounts using a variety of underwater vehicles. And some of these have allowed me to go there directly, climb in, close the hatch, and several of us travel in the water column and to the sea floor to do very different kinds of studies on marine animals. Also use the U.S. Navy's nuclear-powered research submarine, NR-1, which is not in service anymore. I used a variety of remotely operated vehicles that we could either that we control from the surface, from the ship, and these days we can I can sit back home and be part of a cruise on a ship where they broadcast from the seafloor over satellite and then over the web, and I can talk back and forth to the ship and talk to the pilots and scientists there, and I can still sit and have a cup of coffee at breakfast. But so now so that's about how we actually go to work. Let's go diving. There's a picture of me and Alvin looking out the viewport, and this is a painting by a friend of mine who is a scientific illustrator that was showing the underwater landscape that we would see underwater from a cruise we did with Alvin. And this image is of an ROV on the seafloor. This is the Deep Discoverer. It can travel to over 4,000 meters, and again connects to the ship and Gorgia marginalis that actually can grow to over 9 feet tall when it's a large adult. We've seen them other places. There's also sponges that occur in dense groups on the seafloor. All these animals filter food from the water column, so there's nothing that they're not like plants on land where roots pull nutrients from the soil. All the nutrients come from other organisms and material that drifts by in the water column. The interesting part is that these places have been relatively unsampled, because you need submarines to be able to go there. We found multiple new species diving on seamounts and in submarine canyons. This one in the upper right was on my first Alvin dive in the deep parts of Oceanographer Canyon, where my colleague in the sub said, "I don't think we've ever seen something like that before." And we sampled this white bottle brush sponge, and it turned out to be a new species. This was that large. This stretched out, this would be over 9 feet tall. And again, these sea whips, while they look the same, actually are multiple species when you look at their genetics. And even and just like those, other animals that look the same too can be multiple species. This Paramaricia may represent at least 4 species based on genetic sampling across the seamount chain. So just because everything looks the same doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And animals use corals for habitat. So a number of these species only occur on a particular kind of coral. So this little parasol coral here has a basket star that lives in the upper whorl of polyps, and they seem to recruit when they're young, and the sea star grows old as the coral grows old. And here's a picture of the sea star here. These are polychaete worms that live amongst the branches of a different species of coral. This is a little tiny cryllostylid crab, maybe only an inch or so across here, that lives on a species of black coral. And same for this shrimp. It lives in a different species of octocoral. That's just a pretty close-up of one of these basket stars that live on Paragorgia and yellow anemones. Fish use these places as call these places homes as well. And the corals are not the only thing that provide habitat. In the heads of the submarine canyons, there are outcrops of clay that animals can burrow in. This looks tiny, but this is a large tilefish that creates burrows that provide home for themselves and for other species, like American lobster. Redfish use coral colonies for cover, for shelter. This is another tilefish that uses glacial boulders that dropped off during the last glaciation as they melted, as icebergs moved seaward, and uses the crevices underneath the boulders for habitat. And then even tiny fishes like this little cusk eel uses sea urchins kind of as a mobile home to get away from big predators around more structured habitats. This is a codling resting amongst the branches of a soft coral. Octopus use crevices in the canyon walls. This is in Lydonia Canyon. And everybody has to eat, so everybody spends time searching for prey. So this is a larger, related to cod, but this is a deep sea species, searching for small crustaceans along the crevices of a canyon wall. And these look like, this is a species, the common name is false boarfish, but they behave, if you saw this on a tropical reef in the shallows in the Caribbean, you wouldn't be surprised, but this lives in the deep sea. It often occurs in pairs, just like butterfly fish, and it defends territories, much like triggerfish do, by raising their spine. And they've done this right in front of the submarine and the ROV, like, what are you doing in my neighborhood? And there's areas of incredible abundance of some species, like these shortfin squid. This is a picture from canyons farther to the north, but we've seen these kinds of things in the Marine Monument, where the squids are feeding on krill, which are the little shrimps that you see in that large aggregation. But squids are also, they're intense predators, just like large fish are. So here's a shortfin squid ambushing a black-belly rosefish and ultimately having it for a meal. And a cutthroat eel feeding on squid, and a squid feeding on flashlight fish, or flashlight fish. Without being able to go into the canyons with ROVs and submersibles, be able to see these kind of interactions, you'd never figure these kinds of these interactions out simply by looking at what we could trawl up on the deck of a ship. So here's this boulder that's fallen to the sedimented axis of a canyon with some redfish on it, and here's a right here. I'm pointing with my finger. With my cursor, this is where a redfish actually ambushing a myctophid, or a lanternfish. They weren't flashlight fish, lanternfish. And here's the redfish feeding on a small lanternfish. You really don't see that very well. But only a moment later, as we're watching this happen, there's a swordfish that comes by and eats one of the redfish. And this is this is at a couple of thousand feet deep, several thousand feet deep in the canyons. And we also have occasional visitors to the canyons that come from far off distances. This is a Greenland shark that we just happened to run into, or it ran into us as we were exploring one of the canyons in 2013. But there's also resident sharks that live in these places. This is a Portuguese dogfish, or black dogfish, which is a deep sea shark. It lives in the twilight zone. You can see this very large eye so that can detect very low levels of light as it's searching for prey. There's chemosynthetic communities in the canyons too that live off of methane. And these mussels are able to live in the off-gassing methane hydrates, which is an ice, or methane ice, that outcrops along the canyon walls along the eastern seaboard. And there's stuff in between too. It's not all just steep coral-covered walls in the canyons. There's large expansive plains of finer grained sediments, but even on those finer grained sediments, here's a cutthroat eel, and you can see these little fist-sized blobs of mud. These are actually xenophyophores, which is a whole different group of organisms. They're the world's largest single-celled organisms, and they use sand as a skeleton, this brittle star that's on it, simply using it for getting up a little higher off the sea floor. But these are diverse and very fragile along the sea floor. But now let's move up through the water column, and I know my time is ticking away here. Move up through the water column, we see all these otherworldly kinds of fishes, like this dragonfish. These are only, maybe 6-8 inches long, and they use this lure that has a bioluminescent organ on the tip for being able to attract prey. There's also gelatinous organisms, like this colorful siphonophore. And the world's most abundant vertebrate animal cyclothony are tiny fish that are food for a wide variety of species, including krill that can prey on small fish. At the very surface, there are sargassum mats. Just the Sargasso Sea, the western edge skirts along with the Gulf Stream and comes up through the monument, and there's fish that live within the sargassum forests. But the biggest animals that live at the sea surface are marine mammals. And colleagues of mine at the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life at New England Aquarium have been flying aerial surveys out in the canyons. It's too far to go out in the monument with a small plane like this, but to survey marine mammals since the time that the monument was closed to commercial scale fishing. And there's beasts like sperm whales. This is a photo by a colleague, Brian Scarry. And this little map here, which is the only bit of data I'm going to show, shows that marine mammal abundance is really in a hot spot along the edge of the canyons. There's actually been very little survey work out in the Seamounts, which is what we'd like to do in the future. But there's these canyons in the monument area is a real hot spot for marine animals. This is a smaller sperm whale from this at the surface. Usually you see when they dive, they flip their flukes up and you see their tails. This is a fin whale with white-sided dolphins riding on its bow. This is the second largest animal ever to live on Earth, and that includes the dinosaurs. This is a blue whale. They saw 2 during the last survey out in the aerial survey out in the canyons. But we see lots of kinds of interactions that we don't often see in places that are frequently disturbed by humans. These are white-sided dolphins chasing squid at the surface for food. These are beaked whales, and you can see mother and calf pairs. There's a mother and calf right here. Same here. More beaked whales. Maybe I overdid it on the beaked whales, but they are very cool. They are the world's deepest diving predator of marine mammals. People think sperm whales dive deeper, but beaked whales can go to several thousand meters, and they feed on deep sea squid and fishes. So there's a real link between the deep parts of the ocean and the sea surface, doing those kinds of trips every day. And the monument is also home, at least for part of the year, to seabirds like puffins that, during the winter, move offshore to feed on fish and squid that move up in the water column at night. And while we've done lots of science out in the canyons, and this is just a small selection of papers, it's really, and those helped help the president to decide to designate the monument. It was really the public that made this happen. And so it shows that a relatively small group of people can make big things happen in conservation. And with that, and I mean, the canyon is one small postage stamp out in the deep ocean, but by conserving these small places, there's spillover that can help sustain our uses of the rest of the ocean. And just to quote John Muir, when we try to pick out anything all by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe, just showing our small blue planet in the void of space. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. That was a really great presentation. And my favorite part is always seeing the mother and calf pairs at the surface. I think that's really amazing. But
Yeah, that's very cool.
It is so cool. So for this next part, we are inviting you guys to all ask questions. You or your parent can type them into the chat box, and Kelsey will read them as they come in, and Dr. Auster will answer them.
As best I can.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We're starting to get some questions already. So one of our first questions from Sipo is, can a deep sea fish see well in the dark, and how far can it see?
Oh, that's a good question. They can certainly detect they can certainly detect light, and because when deep sea fish move, other fish move or organisms that might be prey, they might set off bioluminescent organisms that create flashes that they can see, and then be able to hone in on prey or to find mates. So yes, they can see, and distance is really related to the visibility in the water. So it's not like necessarily like clear tropical water everywhere in the deep ocean. So depending on color, some animals use red color to be able to signal for things like mating, and red only travels a short distance through water. And others use blue as alarms, or to be able to highlight locations of prey. So that travels a much farther distance. So it really depends on the property of the water.
Yeah, definitely very cool. I've got another question here from Paige, who asks, is the Alvin or something similar still in use for studying the canyons and seamounts?
Well, so Alvin is still in use. It travels all over the world, and it's available for work in the canyons and seamounts. We haven't been back out there with Alvin for some time, but we just had a recent cruise on the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer using the Deep Discoverer ROV. That was part of a longer cruise off the Northeast, and did 3 dives in the monument.
Yeah, which personally, having been able to watch some of the footage from that is really incredible. So I highly recommend it on the NOAA website if people have a few minutes afterwards. We've also got a question from Hudson in Maine, who asks, why do beak whales dive deeper than sperm whales?
That's where their food is. That they are the deepest divers is possibly an effect of evolution, where going deeper reduces competition from all the other animals or all the other species for finding food resources.
Yeah. We've got another great question from Thomas. Do you see much trash on your dives?
Sadly, yes. I guess it depends what much is. We certainly see trash. The farther you go to some of these places expecting that they're pristine and untouched by humanity, but unfortunately, we see bits of plastic and fishing gear. So when things go down the storm drain or get thrown in at the beach, depending on ocean currents, they end up and when they sink, they end up on the seafloor. And so indeed, we do find these kinds of things.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can see some of our plastic everywhere. But we do have a great question from Naomi. How long does it take a parasol coral to grow, and how long do they live?
Wow, that's a great question, and I don't have an answer. So I'm not sure anybody's aged them.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Do we know how old some of the coral in the monument are?
Well, some corals are likely over a millennia, over 1,000 years in age, and many species are over a century. I'm not sure anybody's actually looked at the genus is Metallogorgia, and I don't think anybody's actually looked at aging those. It would be hard, just based on their structure. They have very thin stalks to be able to section them in any meaningful way to get annual growth increments. But I mean that's a great question. We see small ones and big ones. I would imagine, given the growth rates of other species that occur in those same kinds of settings, there are certainly decades to large ones being over potentially over a century in age.
Yeah, we've got another question about age from Amy. How old are some of the animals in the monument? Other than the coral, do we know any of the ages of the sponges or the sharks?
Well, so Greenland shark is the oldest living vertebrate animal. Although they're chondrichthyes. They're not bony fish, but they're hundreds of years old, based on aging using structures in their eyes. Some of the like the redfish can be 70, 80 years old. They're very long-lived, especially the species that live deeper are very long-lived. I'm trying to think of some other fish, crustacean kinds of things where we have ages.
Yeah. And
those are certainly the noteworthy ones that come to mind.
Yeah. And do we know why animals in the deep sea live so long?
But at least in part because of the cold temperatures and low growth rates, and low, relatively limited food resources. Mm-hmm. So in order to basic life history strategies require animals to at least get big enough to not be eaten, for the most part. Mm-hmm. At least vertebrate animals. And that's not to give mice or anything a bad name. I mean, some animals have very fast life histories, get born, grow quickly, reproduce, and die. But that's in different kinds of environmental conditions. The cold and the limited food supply in the deep ocean probably select for species that put a lot of energy when they're young into growing, and then need to gain enough energy to be able to reproduce. So that takes some time.
Yeah. And then
these are tough questions.
How many? Yeah, really great questions. How many species of coral are recorded in the area you're talking about from Betty?
So, based on our work, looking at the historic sampling through the present, we found approximately 75 species or distinct taxa in the monument area of corals.
That's awesome. We have so many questions. Let me find. So we have a question about what kind of squids, from Christopher, what kind of squids were the dolphins chasing in the picture? If we know that.
Those look like long-fin squid. Those were big animals. The squids were big. I think they were relatively large long-fin squid in that kind of abundance.
Yeah, we have a great question here from Jay. Given climate change, are you seeing plants and animals that used to live in the upper zones in the lower zones? Have we seen any impacts on climate change so far in the monument area?
Well, so I mean, what we understand about the monument is based in large part on mostly exploratory research, and so we haven't looked at. So we've got some baselines. Mm-hmm. We've done. In fact, we're working on a publication now, where a transect that we've done in Oceanographer Canyon over several decades shows remarkable stability at around 1,000 meters, 3,000 feet. At the surface, in the canyon heads, we would expect to see effects of climate, of warming. Although we don't have studies there in particular. A colleague and I, a postdoctoral fellow and I, published a report earlier last year that certainly showed multiple species of fish moving deeper along the whole northeast Gulf of Maine region of the continental shelf.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a lot of interesting research still to do there. We have a great question from Katie. What's the coolest thing you ever saw in the monument?
Wow, everything's cool. Boy, that really is tough. Maybe the coolest thing is just these walls of corals. I think they're like the title of the talk is Dr. Seuss's Garden. That these kinds of places still exist on our planet, and they're full of life. I think it's just very, very incredible to see. When I was a little kid, and this was in the 60s, I wanted to be an astronaut. But going into space was really never going to be about finding other worlds with lots of life, at least big stuff. I mean, life in many places, actually, because I need to be careful because colleagues actually do work on those kinds of things. Is likely microbial at best in many places, although we might find some surprises. But being able to go underwater uses all the same kinds of technologies like going into space, but we're just surrounded by living things. And I can do this kind of thing way more frequently than astronauts ever get to go into space. So this is it's all very incredible and everything's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that is a great reason to become a marine biologist. I have a great question here from Elizabeth. Why are sharks important for the ocean?
Because they're predators. And we find that communities of animals without predators tend to have runaway populations of animals farther down the food chain, which can have negative effects on the rest of the community, cascading effects on the rest of the community. Communities of animals, and that's both on land and in the ocean, that have the full suite of predators. Predators influence the entire food web. Top apex predators, top predators influence the entire food web and create stable and sustainable communities that maximize biodiversity. So they have an important function to play.
Yeah. Definitely important to keep those sharks around. So,
and big fish, large fish and sharks can share the same kinds of roles.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a question here from Anthony. Do beaked whales migrate? And if so, where?
My colleague Scott Krause is really the marine mammal expert.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I got it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, definitely we'll ask Scott. Maybe we can email Anthony the answer. And then Asia asked, how many new species have been found in the monument that you know of?
There are multiple. There's several corals, or at least that are represented in the monument. They may have been discovered elsewhere on the seamounts, and we know that they occur in the monument. There's like that bottle brush coral that we discovered in the monument, what's now the monument, back in 2001. And I know there are multiple deep sea fishes that have been discovered in the monument, but I don't have a number off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I think, I mean, just to expound a bit on that point, that we can still go somewhere off our coast, which is one of the most well-studied parts of the global ocean, and find big stuff that don't have names. Just shows us how much more exploration we need to do of our planet.
Yeah, definitely one of the great things about this job is that we get to advocate for places that we don't even understand fully, and why we need to protect more of them so we can find out even what's out there.
Well, so we know enough that they need to be protected.
Yeah, exactly. And then I've gotten a couple of questions from different people. Donna is the most recent person to ask this about how deep sea life withstands the pressure of the water.
Well, certainly through most of the water column, I mean, the deep sea life is composed of water. So they don't have other than the marine mammals that don't have lungs, their lungs actually contract. They don't feel the pressure.
Very cool.
Animals in the very deepest parts of the ocean actually have physiological processes that are mediated in part by the intense pressure, but in these relatively shallower parts. And the animals don't. The pressure isn't the issue. It's the temperature that is important to their physiology and survival.
Mm-hmm. And we've gotten a couple of questions about why this place was important to protect.
Because we found that they were biodiversity hotspots. They were relatively unimpacted. If you look along the entire east coast of the United States, most submarine canyons are relatively close to the coast, and they're used a lot by different industries, fishing, principally running submarine cables. There's discussions of mining, like methane hydrates and manganese crusts offshore. And so this particular place has the only 4 seamounts in the U.S. Atlantic exclusive economic zone, our 200-mile limit, and the 3 submarine canyons that are adjacent to those seamounts are relatively unimpacted over the course of time by other kind of commercial fishing activities. And our understanding of those, they had been sampled a lot, show that they're real biodiversity hotspots, and that the animals that live there are fragile and vulnerable to human disturbances. The interesting part about, this area of our EEZ is that by going through this wide range of depths from the sea surface, and then the canyon heads at about 180 meters down to over 4,000 meters deep, we go through multiple life zones. So in a relatively small area, we can represent and conserve an incredibly wide range of biological diversity. So this is like, we're going down on the monument, but this is kind of like driving up a mountain where you go through different life zones. And so mountains are important places for conservation because you get a wide range of species in different communities in a relatively small area. The same thing happens when you go underwater out along the edge of the continental margin.
Yeah. Well, that was great context. And then I think we'll have one final question before we head over to Michaela, who will lead our art portion. And then this one comes from Justin, which is, what is the one thing that you haven't seen in the monument that you really want to see? Is there one discovery that you wish you would have made, or a place you wouldn't want to go if you got back in one of those submersibles?
Oh, I want to go back and crawl over like Retriever Seamount in a submersible, because for the significant amount of time that we've spent out there, we've only seen a relatively small part of the underwater landscape. So I think there's many more discoveries and just the scenery to be viewed for the first time by going out. And Retriever is one of the farthest seamount out, and there's just it's kind of like wanting to climb mountains. There's different ridges and peaks to be viewed, to just take in the landscape, and we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then finally, we've had a couple of people ask how they can help protect this place. And we'll be sending around a follow-up email with some social media suggestions, but definitely one of the best things you can do to help protect this place is tell more people about it, making sure that people are aware that this amazing place exists and that it's ours. We, as the American public, own it and are helping to protect it is definitely one of the best things you can do to protect all of the amazing animals and coral and life that's found in our deep canyons and on our seamounts.
Yeah, so well, can I just add one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is, you know, one of the most recent additions to our to the public lands that are owned by all Americans. And so this is part of a very long tradition of conserving extraordinary natural resources for the public in perpetuity. So there's, you know, many places that people can go to for commercial purposes, and these small representations of our natural resources that are owned by all Americans this adds to that long history of conservation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Peter, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but
thank
we
you
had
all.
so many great questions that I think hopefully we were able to answer a lot of them, so you can learn even more about this amazing place. So now I think we're turning it back over to Michaela, who is going to lead you all through a great drawing course on sperm whales and give you some ideas of other things you could draw if you were inspired by the coral or the octopuses that you saw in the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you, Peter. That was really, really cool. And so now that we've heard about all these really cool sharks and coral and brittle stars, I thought it would be a lot of fun to learn how to draw your favorite one. So you can, hopefully you guys can all see my screen, but you can, you know, use these photos as inspiration if you want to draw a coral fin or a blue whale, or you can follow along with me and I'll teach you how to draw a sperm whale. So we're going to be drawing something, if you decide to follow me along with me, that looks like this. And so, yeah, I think it should be a lot of fun. Sperm whales are really cool animals, and, you know, they're all over the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. So everyone grab your markers and some paper. I have mine handily right here. And I also have my easel set up right behind me conveniently. And we can get started. I'll give everyone a minute to get all ready and everything. And then I'll lead you through a pretty simple little tutorial. Okay, so we're going to start by drawing a semicircle just like this. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. I'll give you guys a second to catch up. One of my favorite things I think that I know about sperm whales is that they have the biggest brain of any animal that we know about. I think it's up to like 17 pounds, which is absolutely huge. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, so hopefully if you're following along, you have gotten to this point, and we are going to draw another smaller semicircle, and it's going to be in the opposite direction. So I'll draw it here, and then you can copy it on your own paper. Oh, I just got a request to stop sharing my screen because I'm too small to see. Okay, I will pause share, and hopefully, am I bigger now? Okay, well, hopefully that this made it a little bit bigger. No, okay. What I'm going to do is after I do each step, I'll bring it closer to the frame so that you guys can see what I've done. So here is another semicircle. And then see, you can take it just like that. And I'll hold it here for a little bit. Okay, moving on to the next step. This one is going to be a little bit trickier. So we're gonna draw the tail with the flukes on the end, and the flukes are the little flippers at the end of the tail. So I recommend doing a small like peak, like this. And then we're gonna copy that on the other side. Okay, copying on the other side. here we are. And another really cool fact about sperm whales that I'll share with you guys while you're drawing is that they are known to travel in groups. So they travel in pods. It's actually called a pod. And there's usually about 15 or 20 whales in them. So it's like a little group of friends traveling around together. Okay, so we're almost done here. We are just gonna finish off by drawing the belly. So go back to your first semicircle and draw a straight line down. And then you're gonna round it off and draw a flat line along the bottom. So it looks just like that. Yours might be a little bit more rounded than mine. And then for the last part, we're gonna connect the stomach with the tail. So you'll have a whale that looks like this. Just like that. And the fun doesn't have to be over yet. So what you can do next, you can color in your whale. You can even draw some ocean waves. You can draw some coral. You can draw some other fish swimming around there. You could even draw a baby calf. So it looks like it's swimming through the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts. And if you want to share your piece of artwork, you or your parent can take a photo of it and send it to me, my email address, which I think all of you should have. But again, it's mmorris@environmentamerica.org, because what we want to do is take your awesome artwork and share it on our social media accounts so that people can see how cool the Northeast Canyons Northeast Canyons Seamounts Marine National Monument is. So here's my finished product that I made earlier in the day. You can see I drew some coral on here. You guys might want to do something similar, some gulls up here. I also did a sun because I thought it was added some good color. But there's tons of options, and I can't wait to see what you guys all create. So yeah, thank you again, you guys, for joining us this evening. I'm speaking on behalf of me, Kelsey, and Peter when I say we had a ton of fun with you all, and we hope you learned a little bit about the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument, and also that you'll share what you learned with your friends and family. And feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. We're always happy to answer. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.